Hi, everyone. I am excited to talk to you today about the innovation bottleneck and how to unblock that. First, who used to love Choose Your Own Adventure books? These are my favorite. Maybe you still read them. Today's Choose Your Own Adventure is going to be potentially a little darker than what you're used to in these books. But the happy path of the story is a real-life story that happened at Atrium Health, and I'll tell you how they got there. So a man got into a really bad car accident, was rushed to the ER. He was completely out of it. He had to have emergent surgery. In the darker path, unfortunately, unforeseen complications happened, and he did not make it. Now, an important piece of context that the happy path or the Atrium Health path had was that he had recently entered into a cancer clinical trial and had recently started medications as part of that. So Atrium knew about this because their medical record system was integrated with their hospital's clinical trial management system. So they saw right away that he was in a clinical trial, they made some phone calls, unblinded the medication, and were able to plan his treatment to avoid any negative drug interactions. Thankfully, this served the patient very well. He made it out very well after surgery. Not to mention that the protocol avoided deviations and they had context for the, I'm sure, wonky clinical data to come. So this is a harsh reality, and I bring this up because oftentimes integration can feel like a nice to have and gets deprioritized from our technology roadmaps. My point here is that interoperability saves lives, or at least it truly can. So I've always been interested in future treatment possibilities and did some lung cancer research in college. So I was really excited to enter the clinical research industry, and I went to my first conference back in 2010. I had come from Epic, from the EMR world for several years, and in this conference heard a lot about fax machines and paper CRFs as EDC was still on the rise, and realized this might be just as hard to get adoption as the EMR world, where physicians hated technology. But the new innovation was here to solve, and that was investigator portals. Fast forward to today, and this is probably not even a comprehensive list of all the technology innovation options that there are, but there are a lot out there. And this is starting to take its toll on sites. Sites are starting to have a voice, and they're starting to express what a burden this is. And those same portals that were introduced back in the day are exactly what sites are really pushing back on. But regardless of what sites happen to think, technology helps clinical research, right? Well, within that same time period, we've seen study startup take 40% longer than it used to, and now it's 2.5 times more expensive to get treatments to market. So in the macro sense, that's not really accomplishing, I think, what we're all here to do for innovating to actually impact positively clinical trials. But what do sites have to do with all this? Well, even post-pandemic, even with new modalities, almost all trials still rely on sites in some fashion. And yet, of those technologies that we just listed, only 4% of those focus on sites as the primary stakeholder. So there's a disconnect there. We just recently launched a survey with the Society of Clinical Research Sites, and a couple hundred sites weighed in. And it turns out half of an individual's week is spent interacting with sponsor-provided technology, whether that's patient-facing technology or other types of technologies. And of that, 10 hours per week was just spent on duplicating data. That's as if we declared every Monday, everywhere, duplicate data entry day. All sites can't do anything except for enter data twice, or sometimes 3 times. So clearly we have a problem in the industry that's trending in the wrong direction. And there are plenty of really great technology options out there and some great opportunities to really, truly innovate. But if they only get used on a couple of trials, that's not transforming clinical research as a whole. They get stuck in pilot mode. We work in an interesting industry where the key buyer of technology, the life sciences companies and CROs, are not the same as the key adoption stakeholder, which are the sites. So by not including sites in that process, who are key to not only technology adoption, but the clinical trial as a whole, we're really losing out. We're creating a bottleneck of adoption, and it's really holding us back. But why are sites pushing back so much? Is it just they hate change? Everybody's always hated change. So this, I'll dig into exactly why, as well as provide some hope on what we can do as an industry to solve for it. But first, let's contrast how sponsors see the world versus how sites do. So sponsors and CROs, rightfully so, are looking at the success of a clinical trial across all sites, countries, and there are a lot of complexities, but it's relatively manageable. The sites have the flip side of this, and they're not very much in control over all of the studies. A site is looking at the success of all of their trials, so they can run 20 active studies, some run 2,000 active studies at any given time. So they're looking at how do they become most efficient across all of their trials, all of their workflows. Importantly, sites actually need the site-level SOPs that apply across all studies in order to stay FDA compliant. I'm here to share a fact that's little known to the sponsor side of the industry, is that sites actually invest in their own technology. So we at Advarra alone work with 50,000 PIs and their teams who have invested in their own technology to run their operations. So that means that any sponsor-provided technology that has any similarity to what they're already doing is actually burdening them. It's not value add to them. And keep in mind when we say this is what sites see and what they have to deal with, this is a real human being like we've been talking about all day. So let's go through some real examples of how this plays out at a site. And just to keep in mind that this is a real human being, let's call this coordinator Sarah. So buckle your seatbelts. I'm about to take you on a whirlwind tour of life at a site. So Monday, Sarah comes in, she has to do study startup. She has to first submit to to IRB. So she has to get permission from local IRB to be able to see to the central IRB. So she uploads all of the documents for protocols and consents to the local IRB. Then she also does all of that to the central IRB. Then she has to go into the sponsor portal to update the fact that she did that submission so that they're updated. Then let's say IRB approved really quickly, but it's not one that integrates with site technology. So then she has to go in there, she has to download all of the protocol and consent documents, and then she has to upload them into her e-regulatory system or investigator site file for regulatory purposes so they have them on their file. Then she has to go find which e-consent provider is being used for this study, learn how to use it, and update the site-specific consent language. And then she has to go back to the sponsor portal to update the fact that she did all of this. Next, she just completed a visit for a study that had a sponsor-provided EKG, so it provided a printout. So she has to go, she wants to be on top of it, so she goes straight to the EDC and enters the exact same data. Then she has to go to the scanner and upload that same data, attach it to that patient's record in the EMR so they have it for patient care. Then she has to upload it into her e-regulatory binder, again, for compliance purposes. And then she has to go to the sponsor-provided monitoring portal so that it's available for remote monitoring in the future. Then she gets the dreaded amendment email, so she has to go to yet a different sponsor portal to retrieve the amendment, review it all. She actually has to go resubmit to all of the IRBs. I'll spare you of that for right now. But because this amendment has a new visit and new procedure, she has to hand that off to the budget team to prepare for budget negotiations, which kicks off a coverage analysis, which updates, then she needs to update the site CTMS for financials, the billing grid in the EMR to make sure they don't accidentally bill sponsors to insurance and get millions of dollars fines. Then she has to submit for the EMR treatment plans to make sure the treatment is in compliance with the new protocol. Then, of course, she has to take the training on the new amendment. She has to badger the PI to take the training on the new amendment. And then she has to go to yet a different e-consent portal to update the revised consent language. And then she has to track which patients actually need reconsent in the CTMS, since that's what actually drives their work. Don't get me started on recreating documents in sponsor portals, but here we are. We recreate the 1572 and the CV that she already had in the sponsor portal, and then she, because the sponsor requires the signatures in that portal, she has to work with the PI, of course, reset the password, and show him how to sign that, and then she has to turn around and make that PI sign the exact same things in their regulatory system because of compliance purposes. And last but certainly not least, a patient calls trying to be compliant by entering their data into their ePro app. And after they get through the login issues, the patient starts asking questions, and she realizes she doesn't use ePro every day. So she has to go relook up the training manual to be able to help troubleshoot and get the patient to be able to collect their data and stay compliant on that. Then she gets a call from a disgruntled patient who says that they never received their stipend amounts that were promised to her. And it was from a sponsor-provided payment system, so she's trying to figure out how to troubleshoot that and hand that off to somebody who can fix that while also trying to keep the patient happy so that they don't drop off of the clinical trial. Then she gets a call from a provider who has a patient in the clinic with him who presented with a problem, and they know he just had a home visit, and things were happening and data was collected, so she's trying to get access to that DCT portal to provide that to the patient so he can provide the best care to the patient. Whoa. Was that obnoxious and overwhelming to listen to? Imagine Sarah, who not only has to listen to that for a couple minutes, but she has to live that day in and day out, every day at work. The burden is getting so bad that sites are actually declining studies, key opinion leaders in particular, because of the technology burden. I literally saw an email about this last week. So this is obviously bad for the sites, but now it's bad for the sponsors, for the patients, and for the clinical trial. Okay, so I offered hope. So how can we enable new technology innovations and help the sites adopt and lessen their burden and speed up research? I'm going to go through a couple of things that don't work, and then we'll get to what I do think will work. So first, I've heard the plea, which now you can understand, there should only be one sponsor platform to log into. And yeah, so let's think about this. I mean, if we want to live in a monopoly and have all new technology innovation crushed and all of the small and medium technology companies in the room be out of business right away, yeah, that might be an option. I mean, I am definitely a fan of end-to-end solutions. I think there are a lot of benefits. But as an industry, we do need new innovations to push the envelope and keep us moving forward. Another plea that I've heard is let's use site technology instead of sponsor technology, meaning sites not only get to choose their technology, but also the data in whatever format they choose, which leaves sponsors to patchwork together the data after the fact and leave them in the dark about what's happening and the outcomes that are happening in the clinical trial. I think that is swinging the pendulum to the other extreme, and that's extending timelines for clinical trials even further, and that wouldn't get to pilot mode, much less past pilot mode. So what can we do? I propose that we make the data talk to each other. So let's interoperate site technology with sponsor technology. We can learn a lot from the patient BYOD construct and apply it to create a site BYOT approach. Sites are actually already on board with this. When they think about what data they're entering into sponsor systems, they see that over 50% of that data is already collected in their site systems that could be reused. Not surprisingly, 86% of those sites wanted to reuse that. They wanted to leverage that data and technology in some fashion. So we asked them, what data types would be most impactful if we integrated that with sponsor technology? From clinical data to regulatory documents to operational financial data, consent data, and the answer was every single one. So patient BYOD is an interesting lesson in catering to a stakeholder who's not the buyer. And I think that we've come a really long way as an industry within this, so let's see what we can glean. So first, when we were asking patients to collect their own information in technology, we gave them devices. And turns out they really want to use just one thing and not have a bunch of separate devices. So they asked to use their own device. And remember the response was, but that's really hard. We have to comply to CFR Part 11, and there's a lot of regulations around that. But we figured it out. There is a great precedent, and a lot of things have come out of that. The way that patient BYOD was made to work is that we made the data sponsor-centric, but the device patient-centric. So how could we apply that to site BYOT? Turns out when you give sites a lot of technology, as easy to use as it might be, they want to use one thing. They want to use their own technology. Again, we can apply those same things and navigate those complex regulations. And the way that we do that is to standardize and integrate. Make the data sponsor-centric or trial-centric, and the technology site-centric or stakeholder-centric. So, standardize and integrate to truly collaborate. So let's talk about standards. There has been some great precedent set for building standards in our industry, but so far they've been single stakeholder only. So on the site side, there's been EHR standards like FHIR and IHE profiles. On the sponsor and CRO side, CDISC has created clinical data standards and TMF reference model for eTMF documents. Now we need standards that cross multiple stakeholders so that we can kind of cross this great divide and be able to speak the same language between sites and sponsors and CROs. We need standard data, but stakeholder-specific technology that's fit for purpose for each stakeholder. So standardize and integrate to truly collaborate. But how do we do this? So we are actually in the throes of this at Advarra. We recently launched a site sponsor consortium, essentially to do exactly this. And we have a lot of sites at the table of varying sizes and kinds, and sponsors and CROs bent towards action, as well as CDISC to develop and document standards. And the approach that we're taking, I think, could be really valuable for others to take as well. So we're starting with a closed loop approach, or as Steve Jobs would say, own the whole widget. So we are integrating our site technology with our sponsor license technology for site engagement so that we can rapidly design, develop, and deploy this and get it in use, especially the standards in use in real-life clinical trials so that we can iterate on that and really have practical application so that we can tweak it and iterate this as we go. Our next step is to open that collaboration to other technology companies, including competitors, to really extend the input, be able to allow for creating these standards that are truly applicable industry-wide. This moves us beyond the theoretical into kind of reality-based standards. And this is really agile methodology applied to creating multi-stakeholder standards. Now, if everybody's going to go and do this, please adhere to point number 1, leverage existing standards. We don't want to be coming back to this innovation conference next year and all looking at each other trying to figure out, what do we do with all these 50 sets of quote-unquote standards? How do we reconcile them? Let's use what we're all doing and collaborate together so that we can truly create industry-wide standards that can be applied and really integrate across the ecosystem. So imagine Sarah gets a new study startup request or amendment. She logs into her site technology, one place, updates a few things. Everything gets automatically sent and updated to all the other technologies. All the documents flow where they need to for compliance. She thinks it's so easy to run this clinical trial that she spends more time on it, so she enrolls more patients. She is able to spend more time with the patients so they're happier and retain more. She raves to the sponsor about that new innovative technology that was fully integrated into this whole thing to the sponsor. They, of course, go and sign an enterprise deal with them, and the overall trial is a success. Now, imagine what this could do for our industry if sites not only adopted and tracked in real time for these innovations, but they raved about them. Think about all of the innovations that could get us past pilot mode and truly impact clinical trials. And if they're all integrating together and working together on a trial, how that can lead us to better and faster clinical trials and ultimately lead to better treatments for patients. A theme that's been discussed today is patient centricity. Truly, to be patient-centric, we have to be site-centric. They are the face of clinical research to patients. What would you do with duplicate data entry day if we didn't need to use it to enter data? Think about what we could do with recruit patients day or give trial design feedback day. There's so many possibilities with how to use that time wisely. So which path do you choose? Standardize and integrate to collaborate. Standardize across multiple stakeholders with other technology companies. Integrate with technology that sites are already using, and collaborate. Talk with the sites. They will love you for it, and clinical research will benefit from it. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.